Hello everybody, I'm Sheri Wells-Jensen from Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. There is a slideshow that goes along with my presentation. I'm not going to read the slides because all the information is incorporated into my talk, so the slides are just for emphasis. The first thing I want to do also is to thank the organizers of this year's SOCIA conference. I'm really glad that we have the chance to do this. And it's a lot of work to put on a conference, and it's a lot of new and troublesome work to put on a conference over Zoom. And so I'm just delighted to be here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing everyone's talks. And after that preamble, the first thing I would actually like to do to start my talk is complain. I want to complain about the phrase, the right stuff. I'm tired of it. It's overused. And it doesn't mean what we think it means. What it means is we're looking for heroes. We're always looking for the people who are the ones that we want to send out in front of us to do the brave and intrepid things. It's not just about who inspires us. It's about who we trust. Who do we trust to do the big things in our society? And this idea of who we trust is not necessarily or at all shaped by their qualities or even by the jobs that they have to go out and do. Who we trust is shaped by our sociocultural norms. Who do we think our trustworthy people are going to be? Sometimes we can tell this through the helpful lens of economics. And I promise you that is the first time in my life I've ever uttered the phrase helpful lens of economics. And I'm quite confident it will be the last time. So there's that. One of the ways that we can tell that space requires heroes is that it's expensive. A ticket to the International Space Station can cost you about $55 million. That's what NASA says, at least on one page. I think you can purchase one from Space Adventures for slightly less. But anyway, it's pretty expensive. Astronauts' annual salary is also difficult to pin down, but call it $100,000. It depends kind of on their rank, it depends on their cities, it depends on the range of their experience. But what we know is that they do better than cooks, and they do better than janitors. The advertised cost per night in orbit is about $35,000. All this is true despite the fact that astronauts aboard the International Space Station spend about 2/3 of their time on station maintenance and on working out to keep themselves healthy. If you have to change a light bulb, then they have to do that. They don't have an option of calling another guy, right? Things need to be put away. Things need to be tidied. Surfaces need to be wiped down. Maintenance has to be done. And if you're the only person there, despite your pay grade, that's what you're going to do. But as space tourism and industries in space take root, more people will go to space. And jobs in space will roughly, and this is an oversimplification, but will roughly separate themselves into two main types. You're still going to need what, for lack of a better term, I'll call white-collar space jobs, right? So you're still going to need the traditional well-paid professionals, the doctors, the scientists, the pilots, the people who train long and hard and have the background to handle scientific experiments and medical emergencies, and their salaries will probably stay close to current astronaut compensation levels. Why wouldn't they? These people would need reasonable availability for trips back to Earth because they are specialists, and we might need to swap one specialist out for another. You might need a botanist for a while, and then for other activities aboard the space station, you might decide that you need a chemist. So their risk of exposure to things like radiation and microgravity and the effects of isolation is going to be minimal. But as the population in space grows, we're also going to need people to fill what you might call the blue-collar jobs. So we're going to need support personnel. If there's a hotel, we're going to need hospitality staff. We're going to need janitors. We're going to need cooks. If there's industry, we're going to need factory workers. Robots can do some of these jobs, but not all of them. And all that cleaning up, someone's going to have to do that. Someone's going to have to be there to put things back and wipe things down and tidy things away. Their salaries for these kinds of workers are going to be more like, just to pick something, more like a Disney intern. Those folks who make about $20,000 a year, which works out to about $9, $9.50 an hour roughly, and they do it kind of for the experience of it, right? And hold on to that thought. Their travel back to Earth is probably going to be limited because of costs. And because honestly, whatever picking up and whatever the equivalent of zero-G mopping there is to do, they're going to be able to keep doing that. The demands of those jobs are not going to change dramatically one year to another. I'm not advocating for this. I don't think I like it, but the free market has a nasty way of deciding that some people's labor is more important than other people's labor. I kind of wanted to come into this presentation and saying that post-pandemic we will have a new understanding of this, and we will value everybody's work equally, and we will understand that our frontline workers are important and should be paid and all that kind of thing. But I think it's prudent not to hold your breath about those things. Still, if we have these blue-collar space workers, there's important work to be done to securing their basic rights. And many folks are on that job already. People like our own social colleague Jim Schwartz is one of the people who's beginning to establish the basis for human rights for workers in space. And I do think it is for all of us, our ethical obligation to pour energy into this work before, quote, best practices are established. And before people can start saying, oh, we can't change that now, it's how it's always been done. The time to work on assurances for things like safety of these workers and their access to food and heat and oxygen and even their right to leave the facility. It's time to work on those things now before we get economically or sociologically trapped into a situation that will be unethical. Even with basic rights and safety established, these are really not going to be great jobs. These are still going to be blue-collar jobs. The people who have these jobs will work long hours. Things will be awfully, awfully repetitive. They will be far from home. And the euphoria of being in outer space is probably gonna fade. These jobs are going to be boring. Despite the attempts to secure their rights, this population will not be traveling back to Earth as frequently as the other folks. They'll have minor problems like extended periods of nausea, kidney stones, rashes, loss of the sense of smell, backaches, insomnia, and more severe problems as their stays extend: radiation sickness, some kinds of cancer, bone loss, muscle loss, impaired cognition, impaired vision, severe mental stress, and depression. Now, companies, being what companies are, need to choose who they're going to employ. And so they will develop campaigns targeting specific groups of people that they think are likely to take these jobs or kinds of candidates that they find desirable. They might do a campaign similar to what the United States military is doing, which is trying to attract candidates from chronically underemployed populations. It's a job, somebody's going to want to take it. In this case, specifically, this may include disabled people. The unemployment rate in the United States for disabled people is generally double the national average. This statistic includes everybody, and this is actually quite good compared to some of the other unemployment rates for disabled people around the world. But it's also worth noting a couple additional statistics that the unemployment rate for blind people in the United States is about 70%. The unemployment rate for folk on the autism spectrum can be as high as 85%. The disabled community is under a great deal of economic pressure. In addition to this, disabled people might be responding to other realities, like this one. NASA spends a lot of time worrying, rightly so, in most cases, about the condition which causes changes in people's visual perception, when they spend a lot of time in low Earth orbit. They tend to become farsighted. And to some extent, for some people, this doesn't undo itself when you get back to Earth. For blind people, this particular moderate, small to moderate change in visual acuity is not even worth thinking about. People who already have low muscle mass or low bone density, if they are okay to be launched into orbit, may find that microgravity is actually a better environment for them to live in than on Earth. So they might find these jobs even more attractive. What some people consider an environment that is too boring and too monotonous, other folk might consider pleasantly comfortable and might engender a feeling of security. So, if disabled people will be taking these jobs, the jobs, along with basic safety features of the space facility, will need to be made accessible. Okay, it's never been hard to make most jobs accessible. We just currently lack the political will to do this on Earth. And it may take almost no modification at all for some things to be made accessible. It's just a thing that we have to decide that we are willing to do. And here's another thing that's possible. In a kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, in a kind of anti-gravity trickle-up effect, people may start demanding that the tourist parts of the facility also be made accessible. This is the principle of universal design. Once you notice what accessibility does to an environment, you start thinking, hey, that's pretty great. I want more of that. So if we develop a spacesuit, for example, that's easy for a person with one hand to put on and secure by herself, that's a spacesuit that's easier for everyone to put on. If we figure out that we need environmental controls that have tactile markings or braille markings for blind people to use, all the rest of the folks might decide that when the lights go off in emergency, they would very much enjoy having tactile markers on those environmental controls themselves. So this would, by the way, for what it's worth, also increase the pool of potential fee-paying tourists who will find their vacations easier to manage. In particular, I'm thinking about older populations, and we've often talked in the literature about how senior citizens might enjoy a nice weekend in orbit. Often it's the case that senior citizens don't consider that they need accessibility in particular. They might not ask for it, but once they have it, just like the person who is experiencing for the first time the spacesuit that's easier to put on, they might find that they really like it. Okay, and here is what could happen. This will put space habitats ahead of Earth habitats in terms of accessibility. So we might imagine then that the reaction on Earth will be to demand for everyone what these space workers already have. So there is a precedent for technological innovations developed in outer space to be adopted on Earth when those things are deemed convenient or useful. How likely is all this? Some parts of it I am quite certain of, and the rest is within our control. As we work out how space facilities will be built, how they'll be managed, and how they'll be governed, we, as the people doing the research and laying the groundwork for these space habitats, have an opportunity to make things better. It's possible that very good things indeed could happen. It's possible that space, which is now totally inaccessible to most people, may become the vehicle through which everything becomes more accessible for everyone. Thank you.